Alright, well, the cafe build I did a few years ago came back into the shop for some surgery because when I made it, it was about 3 years ago I guess, when I made it, I made the seat way too high and the tank way too high. It was just so uncomfortable to ride that I probably put only about 40 miles on it or so. So, it's all done now and it's lowered down. So you can see now I can get my feet firmly on the ground and sits a lot better. So now my whole back won't hurt. So now it is time to try to fire this thing up and see if I can breathe some life back into it after sitting for 3 years. Let's get set up over here and look at some of the things to do to prep it so we can fire it back up after sitting for so many years. Alright, so first up is the battery. And you're going to hear a lot of the last thing you want to do things as we're going through how to get this bike to fire back up. There are going to be a lot of last things you want to do. Well, the last thing you want to do is try to jump a dead battery, like a dead cell in it. Now this is a brand new battery, I just put it in today. So it is all ready to go, fully charged up and everything. The old one, when I put a multimeter on it, it had some bad cells and it wouldn't hold a charge. So the last thing you want to do is leave that old battery in there and try to jump across it with something. If you're going to do that, you don't want to spend the money yet because you don't know if it's going to run, you don't want to get a battery. Take one of the wires loose, disconnect it from the old battery with a bad cell, and hook up to a new battery. Put one beside it, set it on a bench or something like that. But you don't want to try to start the bike with a battery with dead cells in it because it's going to ruin the charging system. It'll overheat the rectifier, burn wires out and stuff like that. So the last thing you want to do is leave that old battery in there in parallel to a new battery and try to jump it. So now let's move on over to the other side and we're going to look at making sure that the motor will still turn over. Alright, so we got a good battery and we know not to jump an old dead cell battery. So before we take this cover off, because I got to check the rotation and make sure that the cylinders will rotate freely, because after sitting for so many years, a lot of little critters like get up in the exhaust pipes and they'll deposit things in your exhaust, and if the valves were open when it stopped, they'll deposit things in your cylinder. So we're going to check that. But while we're over here, we're going to check first, we're going to check the oil level, because the last thing you want to do is start one of these up if the fuel has been leaking for 3 years down through the system and the float got stuck or something like that and it ran down in the motor, filled your oil up with fuel, and then it's really full. So what we want to do is check and make sure that the oil is still somewhere in the sight glass like we had it left. So leaning on its side, it's full. So what I got to do is tip it up a little bit. And we're going to watch our sight glass and we're going to make sure that the oil is not so full. And so I'm going to hold it so you can see right there my oil level's coming down. So no fuel got in my oil while it's been sitting for 3 years, but it's really important because if that crankcase is filled up with fuel from where it's been dripping down over the years, it's not going to fire up. You're going to lock something up. You're going to blow oil and fuel all over the place. So always check and make sure that your oil level is okay. If you can't get it at the sight glass like you left it 3 years ago, I drain the oil and make sure that it isn't full of gas. Now, one of the things I do is I put these little shutoffs on there. They're really handy because you can't trust these petcocks. They leak all the time. And so 40 years, you know, the little seals go bad and they'll constantly let some fuel down. But if you'll put some quarter-turn shutoffs on there, pretty much guarantee you're not going to get any fuel down in here over the years while it's sitting, even though there's a little bit of fuel in the tank. So check that oil. That's the next thing we want to do. Then we're going to set up, we're going to take this cover off, and we're going to check our rotation. Alright, so time to check and make sure that the motor will rotate around fully. So we got to take the cover off, and if you struggle to get these off, just use an impact driver and you can put it in the screw and then you can break them free. So just get you one of these cheap impact drivers over at the cheap store and you can break those things free without stripping them, because they get on there and they get tight. Alright, so off comes this little guy, and remember that arrow is the rotation of the crank. It's not the rotation of that little guy. He comes off like a normal, so he goes this way. So don't strip him out. A lot of people do it. Resist the urge to go that way because that little arrow is telling you to crank. Alright, so now we can get in here and we can rotate this thing. Now, this motor's got a ton of compression because I did a lot of playing with it. And I got compression releases on here, so it's going to help me start it. But you'll hear it when it cranks. Brand new battery, whole 9 yards, and this thing just struggles to crank because the compression is so high. But we shall see if we can get it over. So I'm just going to rotate it around. I'm going to watch the sight glass, just make sure I do a full rotation. But everything feels free. So I went through one compression, I just got to get the other one. There's the other cylinder. Oh, plenty of compression. Knocked my knuckle off there. Like I say, it was rebuilt. I only put 40 miles on it, so it ought to have some serious compression. Plus I played with the heads and kind of took a little bit of that area away on these 750 heads that are pretty tight anyway. So I don't know what my compression ratio is, but it's a monster of a bike once you get it fired up. So let's get this put back together. Then we'll move on to our next step, is checking to see if we get any fuel in the bolts. Alright, so we verified we got a good battery because I replaced that. I checked to make sure there's no fuel down in my oil, and that was good. Checked the rotation of the cylinders, made sure everybody is still free, nothing was inside of it. Didn't sound crunchy or anything. So add a little bit of gas, didn't want to add a bunch because I may have to take it apart and clean the carburetors, who knows. But we got a little bit of gas in it, so now what we got to do is drain our bowls if there was anything in them. Now like I say, I highly recommend using these little shutoffs right there. They don't cost much at all, just put them in line. Because when I shut the fuel off, if over time, if I had drained the bowls like you're supposed to when you store a bike, and that's another thing, if you're not going to ride one for 6 months, 8 months, just drain the fuel out of the bowls. It's going to help everything not get all soaked with fuel, especially if you run ethanol. But for me, the shutoffs work good because I can guarantee that when I drain the bowls, no fuel's going to come dripping down because my petcocks are jointed. But what I want to do now is go in here and see if we're going to get any fuel. So let's hook the fuel line up. And so what we're going to do is open up the bowl. Now it should be empty, so we don't get any fuel. Just a little bitty bit of fuel came out. I got like 2 or 3 drips, so there was a little bit of residual fuel down there in the bottom of the bowl. So what I want to do now is I'm going to open up my little shutoff right here and switch her over to prime right here. Like I say, those are bad. And now we got some fuel. So good news is at least my floats are down, so I'm getting the fuel, right? You can give it a little knock knock to see. So what I'm going to do is let it fill up the bowl a little bit. And we'll watch this right here. I'm using a clear filter so I can see when the fuel stops flowing. And as it's flowing to fill up that first time, you want to thump it, because if that float is stuck down, it's just going to fill up your cylinder with fuel. So, thump, thump, thump. Now I'm going to turn the fuel off, or you can turn the petcock off, whichever way you want to do it. And I'm going to drain that out, because that's probably got some nasties. And if you look down in here, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but there's all kinds of little black cruddies that are in that fuel. And that's the stuff that was in the bottom of the bowl from the last time I ran it. Plus it sat for 3 years, so some of that stuff just kind of builds up in there. So it's good to drain these bowls out before you ever try to start one after it's been sitting for a while, because you'll suck all those little cruddies up in your jets, boom, you're done. You're going to be taking the carburetors off, you're going to be cleaning the whole thing out. So now we'll switch over to the other side and do the other one, and then with all of this done, I'd say we're ready to put a little fuel on it and give it a try. So let me switch over to the other side. I'll do the very same thing, drain the bowl out. Then we're going to see if we can start this thing up. Alright, so for the moment of truth, and I got the browser open just in case it fires up, because it's probably going to stink me out of here after 3 years of sitting. They don't tell them what kind of carbon is going to come out of this thing. So let's get our fuel turned on and fill up our bowls after we cleaned them. And I don't want to prime them too long because just in case those floats are sticking, it's going to fill up my cylinder. So all I want to do is just prime it a little bit, get a little bit of fuel in there. And now we put her on choke. Compression release is out, so we're going to see. But you'll hear this thing, it's got so much compression, me messing with this motor, got the compression so high the thing just doesn't even want to crank. But I got my screwdriver handy, tap my bolt, get these things just in case it fires up. And here we go. We're going to give it a try. You can hear that thing just barely cranks over, so we got to give it a little bit of help. Now if I hit this compression release, which nobody has compression releases on them but me, if it blows fuel out, it's going to tell me I got a lot of fuel in that cylinder right there. So let me hit the compression release. So you saw a bunch of fuel come out. But lost something. Not wanting to crank over now. Got no power to the starter solenoid. She did try to fire up. Let me give it a little more fuel and see. I think my front cylinder's stuck, so we're going to have to take our spark plug off and we're going to have to see what's up with the front cylinder. So we'll be back here in just a minute to check this out. Alright, so as we can see down here, this is fuel that is coming out of the exhaust pipe because my front cylinder is not firing. So you can see all that fuel coming out of the end of my pipe on my front cylinder, because the little shutoff is not working on this side. So looks like I may have to take the carburetors off and clean them because that float is sticking, it's not blocking off. But I'm going to play a little bit longer and see if I can wrap on it and get it to fire up. So we'll set the camera back down over here and we'll check and see if maybe we can get it to light. Alright, with a little more wrapping on our front cylinder's fuel bowl, maybe we got it to seal up. So now, let's see if we can purge this thing and get both cylinders fired. So we'll try it again. Starting up on the back, ruffling, I pulled the plug. See, the throttle started running because I got a gap in there. There's way too much fuel. Alright, so after continuing wrapping on the fuel ball here, get back and put it on too. And I'll get over there and do that to her glory. So I'll let it idle for a while and clean itself out a bit. Might put a little sea foam in it and we'll be in good shape. If it doesn't cooperate and that bowl still sticks, I'll pull the carbs off and clean it up. But hey, after 3 years, everything checks out. And other than a sticky fuel bowl, looks like we fired up fine. Well, alrighty. Well, thanks for watching.